The world's biggest problem, eternal debt, paying taxes to pay banks money they created out of nothing. Chapter 1. Sovereign countries don't have to borrow money from banks who create it out of nothing. Sovereign countries can create their own money. 1. I already covered the money conspiracy in other sections. I've studied at least 30 or so money activists at Vigilante.tv, InfoWars, TalkStream Live, and Gerald Salent, who has been publishing the Trends Journal for 30 years or so. Jeff Rense and people talk every day for several hours at Rense Radio. Vinnie Eastwood in New Zealand had a video on his YouTube channel called The Final Banking Solution. Ellen Brown, Simon Thorpe, Colin Maxwell on the Vinnie Eastwood Show, where they held a money forum and came to the same righteous conclusion. The banks create money out of nothing and lend it to national governments, putting our nations into debt to them. A bunch of elitists sucking money from that should go towards us, the people, creating great societies. Instead of paying the national debt to them, the bankers, we should be using that money to build hospitals, roads, schools, etc. Ronald Bernard, the Dutch ex-banker, said they asked him to attend a child sacrifice in order to advance in the banking world. These money activists say we're being held down by the limits of the banking system, which keeps us indebted to banks for the money that they created out of nothing. They all acknowledge this is the problem but have no clear, simple solutions to it. My solution is to bring the People Power Program into existence, a new government agency where the people vote online on the big issues. The first order of business is to create the online voting agency, aka the People Power Program, that would replace the Senate. We would bring it into existence with a national referendum. This is where activism comes in. A bunch of activists have to get together to demand an online referendum to change the structure of government. Here is the referendum question. Should we abolish the Senate and replace it with the online voting agency, where people will vote on big important issues that the President/Prime Minister and Congress/Parliament come up with, plus the people will come up with their own ideas/bills and vote on them? Yes. No. After it comes into existence, we create several money bills that the people vote on. Should we, as the United States federal government, end our dealings with the Federal Reserve, which is a private central bank that creates money out of nothing and lends it to us, the federal government, expecting this money back at compound interest? Yes. No. Should we cancel the federal government debt to the Federal Reserve since they created this money out of nothing? Yes. No. Should the U.S. Department of Treasury create a government-owned central bank called the United States Central Bank, which will create money out of nothing and give it to the federal government when and as required for government services and to stimulate the economy, being careful to not create so much that it causes inflation? Yes. No. Since the U.S. government will have no debt because it is creating its own money, should we abolish the Internal Revenue Service and end income tax? Yes. No. Banks are the only business that have an unfair advantage because they create money out of nothing through fractional reserve banking every time they make a loan. Should the U.S. Department of Treasury create a chartered bank to compete with for-profit chartered banks? This bank would offer a 1% higher interest rate on savings accounts than normal banks and a 1% lower interest rate on loans than normal banks. Yes. No. This is how the nations of the world get out of the burden of paying income tax money to cover the debt at compound interest to these banks. The United States debt to the Federal Reserve is so high that it barely pays on the interest of the debt, not the principal. That money that the U.S. government sends to the Federal Reserve that it gets from taxes could be used to build schools, hospitals, bridges, trains, etc. This is how we're kept down, by debt to banks who create money out of nothing. People have to get behind one simple good idea in order to overthrow the despots who have been running the world since Jesus threw the money changers out of the temple. Matthew 21:12-13. Jesus went into the temple courtyard and threw out everyone who was buying and selling there. He overturned the money changers' tables and the chairs of those who sold pigeons. He told them, "Scripture says, 'My house will be called a house of prayer,' but you're turning it into a gathering place for thieves." Don't believe me? Start by going on YouTube and watching this simple video. 12-year-old child reveals one of the best-kept secrets in the world. Squelch Academy Channel. The girl's name is Victoria Grant. She gives the same speech a number of times in different places that are on YouTube. The entire scam is right there in 6 minutes. Sovereign countries can create their own money too. The world banking system is owned by the Bank for International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland, created in 1930 by a group of bankers with no authority to any nation or any regulatory body. It appointed itself as the world caretaker of money, creating it out of nothing, lending it to all governments except for Cuba, North Korea, Sudan, and Iran, then wanting all this money they made up back at compound interest, so the world is in debt. We're paying income tax to pay on the interest on this debt to these bankers, and everybody is either too stupid or too scared to do anything about it. In almost every country in the world, the government is supposed to be a sovereign nation, meaning it has the authority to create its own money. Somehow the world banking system hijacked all these governments by saying you can't create your money to use to create a great bountiful society. You have to borrow money from our banks, either our private central bank in many countries or the chartered banks, which are ruled by the Bank for International Settlements as the default world authority of money, even though nobody gave them that power. They took it like dictators. Nobody questioned them. The average person, even politicians and elitists, don't understand the world monetary system, so they leave it alone. It's a massive counterfeiting scheme where the banks all over the world create money out of nothing and lend it to governments, people, and businesses. They want this money back at its face value plus compound interest, which is distinct from simple interest because there is interest on the interest. Right now, the U.S. Federal Reserve, a private central bank, has loaned so much money that they created out of thin air to the American federal government that they will never pay this money back. In a way, it doesn't matter because the Federal Reserve is in the position of master of America. Right now, they get to create money out of nothing in perpetuity, lend it to the American federal government. The American federal government makes money by collecting income tax, customs fees, licenses fees, etc., then constantly pays on the debt. The problem is that because the American government is subject to this debt, their obligation is to pay it, not to do great things for society like build a high-speed train, offer free college education and health care, etc. They have the American government their slave by being indebted to them so bad that they barely make payments on the interest to this debt. See the debt at usdebtclock.org. Sovereign countries can create their own money. 3. The people of America and most other nations are forced by law to pay income tax and other taxes to the government because of this scheme where the government borrows money from banks who create it of nothing. They are expected to pay it back at compound interest. What this translates to is that the world banking system, headed by the Bank for International Settlements, creates money on paper and on computer screens, lends it to governments, people, and businesses, then expects this money back plus an interest fee for providing the service of lending that money. In truth, they created that money out of nothing, but the people of the world have to sweat and toil to earn money to pay the national debts of their federal governments to these banks. This is disguised slavery. You think you are free, but at 18 years old, when you start working, you think that you earn so much money. Then when you got your first paycheck, you realize that the government took out so much money for taxes. Almost nobody questions this. They accept it as life, some scheme where they say the government has got to pay its bills. Pay its bills to who? I thought the government was a sovereign entity. It's at the top of the heap. It creates the money it needs. That seems natural, but the bankers had to squeeze their way in to get control of the money. It goes back to the Rothschild Bank buying up most of the stock for pennies on the dollar when they pretended that Nelson lost to Napoleon at the Battle of Waterloo. This scheme made them the richest money holder in England, whereupon they went to the government and said, give us control of the money through the Bank of England. We'll give you money whenever you want. Life will be easier for you. They did not tell them they were going to lend that money and the government would have to pay it back forever. This is what we, the human race, are up against, a banking system that sucks our wealth out to a few elitists who run the world. This is what they call the shadow, secret societies, or the New World Order government. They, the bankers and elitists, want a one-world government because it would be easier to control the human race through one central entity rather than controlling about 200 countries. If you want to get weird and deep, they say that these bankers are the fallen angels who were banished to earth by God in the Bible. Their task is to take over the human race through their Antichrist in the book of Revelation. In the end they lose, but there will be much suffering until then. This monetary system is so entrenched that even groups of activists can barely make a dent into it. They talk about it a lot all the way back to Woodrow Wilson when he realized he screwed up by bringing in the Federal Reserve, the income tax, and getting America into World War I. He realized he was a dupe manipulated to do all this evil stuff. Here is his quote. "Since I entered politics, I have chiefly had men's views confided to me privately. Some of the biggest men in the United States, in the field of commerce and manufacture, are afraid of something. They know that there is a power somewhere so organized, so subtle, so watchful, so interlocked, so complete, so pervasive, that they better not speak above their breath when they speak in condemnation of it." Woodrow Wilson was some mild-mannered guy running Princeton University when a group of people convinced him to run for president, whereupon they used him to do their bidding. That's how evil people work, behind the scenes. They hijacked the entire United States without any bloodshed. Sovereign countries can create their own money for. In the past, countries created their own money and spent it on projects to improve the country and stimulate the economy. Bankers organized themselves and tried very hard to install themselves into government affairs by offering to manage the national treasury. In England, the king was managing his own money through his team of people when the Rothschild Bank approached him and said, "Let us manage all your money to make life easier for you." The king believed them. They set up a central bank, which was a random building somewhere without piles of cash or gold in it. This central bank was a private central bank, even though it was called the Bank of England. It created money on paper, then gave that money to the government of England, which it had to pay back at compound interest. People were too stupid back then to challenge them much. Nobody said this is stupid. You're making money up and we're supposed to pay it back with compound interest through the hard work of our people who pay taxes to this debt you created out of nothing. This is how this wage slave system started. The banks create money out of nothing through what they call fractional reserve banking. They lend that money to the government and want it back at compound interest. The people have to pay income tax to pay the bank back this debt. This is why we live in slavery right now. Sovereign countries can create their own money. 5. Every country is entitled to its own sovereignty, to create whatever money it needs to finance projects to employ its people to aspire to great things without accruing any debt in the process. It's all good as long as the money is used to create something, not just created as phony wealth with nothing much done with it, which is where the United States is right now. Lots of dollars created out of nothing, creating nothing much as far a great economy and nation with a solid infrastructure, solid industry, and inspired people who love their country and want to get up every day to work at it and be a part of it. The people that create something of value in society are in debt to banks who create nothing but money in the form of loans out of thin air. If the governments of the world created their own money as they should because they're sovereign nations entitled to do so, there would be no national debt or income tax, but the banks suckered everybody into thinking that they know what's best, so they should constantly create money out of nothing and lend it to both the government and every person that gets a loan or a mortgage. I'm saying get the governments out of debt by creating their money, not borrowing it from either a privately run central bank or by buying bonds from the private banks like they do now in almost every nation. When a government creates its own money, it doesn't have the fear of debt, so it can create big projects to stimulate the economy. The world is abundant. As long as the people of any nation get up every day, inspired to go to work on productive things, there will always be prosperity. The way the world is now is a mess, controlled by the few people who control the money. The problem is that the interest on the money it owes grows very quickly to a level that will never be paid back. The government tries to suck what it can from the people through taxes, but the taxes barely cover the interest on the money it owes the central bank. This debt gives the bankers supreme power over the government, the politicians, and the people. No politician has the guts to challenge anything they do as wrong or immoral. The people are the ultimate suckers. Their hard-earned money is sucked up in taxes to forever be enslaved, paying the interest on the national debt to private bankers who keep all this money as pure profit. Almost nobody questions this massive scam. We, the people, should not let private bankers run the central bank and manage the money supply, because it's an immoral conflict of interest to supposedly exist to serve the public good while at the same time existing as a private business out to make as much profit for yourself as you can. Every central bank in the world that is run by private bankers is stealing money from the citizens in a number of ways. The most basic way is that they create money out of nothing and charge interest on it to the government. Then when the government pays them back, all that money is pure profit for them, which the people have been enslaved to pay for through taxes. When any commercial bank makes a loan to anyone like you, they create it out of thin air too. By the system of fractional reserve banking, they are allowed to lend 10 times or more the amount of money they have in deposits by customers in bank accounts. So when they give you a mortgage loan, they created that money out of nothing on a computer screen. Only 3% of the nation's money is in cash. The rest is simply credits and debits on a computer screen. You have to pay them back with interest for a contract they made up, which took them a few minutes of work. That's all they did to create that mortgage that will take you 20 or so years to pay off. This is how the system works. Bankers are very rich with very little effort. We don't have to live like this in bondage to these invisible rulers. We don't need to pay all that income tax. We need to take the central bank away from the private bankers, give it to the government, who will create money and pay it back to the central bank it runs through bonds, fees, and taxes, but never charge interest on the money it owes itself. We, the citizens of the world, and specifically the citizens in any country, can take over our governments and central banks and run them ourselves. You simply have to kick the private bankers out of the central bank. The government takes it over and creates its own money. If we did this, virtually all the money problems in the world would be solved. It's that simple. Don't let anyone fool you into thinking it's more complicated than that, because it isn't. Sovereign countries can create their own money. 6. There is no good, logical reason for a government to borrow money from a bank where it has the power to create its own. The social science called economics is a fake way to pretend that the idea of money is complex and better left to so-called professionals. The truth is that everybody who pays income tax is being robbed of their money by a scam. This is one of big problems that keep us all living as limited, scared wage slaves. Almost nobody understands it. You never hear the politicians say anything against the banks because they're afraid of them. We, the people, should be up in arms to revolt against this scam that robs us all of the money that we could use to create great projects unfettered by phony debt in a scheme created by bankers. In an enlightened society, free citizens do not pay a part of their earnings to the government. The government shouldn't need your money if it has the power to create its own. This is all a phony system created by bankers that almost everybody buys into. It's a big scam that robs the whole world of their hard-earned, which they have to give to bankers who create all their money out of nothing. Why does any government which is supposed to be a sovereign nation borrow money from private entities like private central banks and merchant banks, who all create this money out of nothing through their fractional banking powers, then lend it to the government and expect the government through the people's taxes to pay it back with compound interest? In the United States, the privately run central bank called the Federal Reserve controls all the money. The solution is simple. National governments have to create their money through their own central banks. Private banks can do their business with the people, but the government doesn't need them to create money, so that's the end of their cash cow with government debt. National governments must create their own money through their own central banks in order to not be enslaved by the debt almost every country in the world now has, because the international banking cartel set up a system where private central and merchant banks create money out of nothing and lend it to governments rather than the governments creating the money alone, by themselves without debt or interest to anyone. Destroy this system, then create money to fund projects that help people and improve life. We can easily destroy this wage slave system of debt and the sky won't fall in. The economy won't crumble. We don't need an income tax. Income tax was created to pay the debt with the compounding interest on it the government got when it borrowed money from a private central bank or a system of the private banks through selling bonds, which these banks all create out of nothing, rather than the government creating its own money through its own central bank that it owns when and as it needs it without creating any debt against itself. It's the biggest secret scam ever. An economy without income tax will thrive because people will have more money to spend, therefore add to the multiplier effect. Chapter 2. Federal governments create their own chartered bank. Banks as for-profit businesses get to create money out of nothing. Get rid of the existing banks so that the people profit from fractional reserve banking, creating money out of nothing, not private banks. All the banks you see everywhere wherever you might live create money out of nothing every time they make a loan. This is wrong for a few bankers to make all that money out of nothing while everybody else works hard for it. A solution is that for every federal government in every country to create its own government-owned chartered bank with better terms than the existing banks and keep building branches everywhere until they completely put the private banks out of business. This would be good because the people will reap the profits from their national chartered bank, not the bankers who have created these societies we live in now, where we're all debt slaves to them who created all the money out of nothing every time they created a loan for anything, including mortgages. This is why they're so powerful, because they get to create money out of nothing while everybody else is a wage slave who has to sweat for their money. That's the root of all our problems. We, the people, in bondage to these monetary systems we live under.